The missionaries that once inhabited the lone forest are a mysterious group. We know little of what brought them to the peninsula, and even less of what ended up causing their disappearance. Nevertheless, today I will be trying to gain a greater understanding of these missionaries that once inhabited the cold, dark region of this planet known as the forest, and who exactly they were, with the best theory I can muster from the evidence we have. At the turn of the 10th century, Christianity as a religion was at its strongest, recruiting a large number of followers and ensuring that the church continued its growth throughout the world. For those who aren't familiar with the Christian missions, they are essentially an expansion attempt. Groups of indoctrinated members of the church will actively traverse new lands and seek out new peoples in order to offer educational, medical, and lifestyle correction aid. This was occurring all over the world and was met with mostly positive reception and new additions to the church's reach. However, sometimes the Christians overstepped their boundaries, quite literally in some cases. Now, we are not certain where exactly this forest game takes place. However, it is suggested that the peninsula is located somewhere in the northwestern regions of Canada, even hinted to by the developers. So this makes a lot of sense because at the time, many Christian missionaries would have been moving through the continental America, searching for new peoples to bring to the mission during the 17th century and onwards. Now, something interesting I want to point out is that there is an older style of Japanese type ship that can be found on the peninsula, damaged and sunken. What's more interesting though is that the items you can find in this ship are a collection of both Japanese and Latin papers, as well as the Japanese ship's designs and the Christian church coffin and cross designs being found in the same spot. So how does this make any sense at all? Well, let me explain. Now, a little known fact is that Japan was actually visited many times by Christian missionaries and formed a decent following of the Orthodox Christianity belief from the late 16th century onwards. The practice was very quickly banned in fear of prosecution from the Japanese emperor of the time, that saw it as a danger to the Japanese morality and way of life during most of the 17th century. Eventually, through the mid-18th century, the practice was again continued after the Meiji Restoration, that saw the Freedom of Choice of Religion Act introduced into Japan in the year 1871. Basically, I believe that a group of Christian missionaries, comprising those of British or American origins, along with a group of Japanese missionaries, visited the peninsula sometime shortly after the year 1871. Their attention drawn to the peninsula after understanding that a native tribe of people lived there. How they came into this information is not known, as the inhabitants could have been spotted by passing ships or seen by natives of the area, such as Indians or Inuits, etc. No matter the method of detection, these unknown peoples came to the attention of the church, and so the mission was prepared. And with the Japanese being fresh to the church, it was probably a symbolic voyage together, in order to bring the Christian faith to even more souls around the globe. After the expedition was set, the missionaries travelled to the peninsula by ship, as the landmass was cut off from the rest of the American continent by an extensive and quite impossible to traverse mountainous region. Something important to note is that they seemed to be ready to extensively explore the cave systems with a variety of heavy tools, such as a large stockpile of dynamite. It seems like the missionaries may have known more about the peninsula than first thought. How they came across this information is unknown, but the most likely solution is that somehow, some way, the stories of the resurrection obelisk somehow find its way to the church. That, coupled with the fact that there was a population there ripe for conversion to the Christian faith, made this expedition high on the priority list. Using a Japanese vessel, they eventually made it to the peninsula. However, bad luck struck rather quickly, as their ship was hit violently against a reef along the coastline, forcing them to take a number of lifeboats and salvage only their bare minimum resources. After finding safety in a cave entrance, the missionaries set up a base in one of the larger caverns, and after a certain amount of time are able to recover from the events, leaving behind a number of drawings and items, which included one drawing, presumably of the ship, of what the ship looked like before it was destroyed. Aside from this, there was also a crossbow that could be found with a collection of schematics left behind for how to construct crosses, church buildings, and even coffins. All this hidden behind the picture of the ship. A possible break glass in case of emergency type situation, in case something went bad with the natives. However, this is just speculation. They were able to salvage a large amount of their tents and supplies for making camp, as well as their large stockpile of dynamite sticks. They soon venture to the surface from what is known as Cave 11, and once finding the openings to the particular cave systems, they further set up smaller camps on the surface. After a short amount of time on the island, the missionaries find very little evidence to clue them into the existence of a human civilization there, despite the rumours that there were large gatherings of people seen along the coastlines. As they press further into the forested area of the peninsula, they would create camps and leave behind the few odd tools and even a flintlock pistol that belonged presumably to one of the crew of the ship. They also continued to explore notable cave systems, such as caves 1, 3, 9, and 5, along with their remnants being found on various sinkhole ledges in a few smaller cases. After being on the peninsula for some time, their efforts had seemed to come to a halt. They had not seen the people that were supposed to be inhabiting these lands, and nor had they discovered a device capable of bringing back the dead. Instead, all they found was the remnants of barbaric camps where mangled flesh lined the ground and was scattered before them, tied to trees and other ornaments. Through the night, the distant screaming and screeching of creatures unseen would echo through the forest. At some point during their journey, they eventually saw something. It very quickly placed fear in their hearts from the mere sight of the creature. It is suggested that their first encounter may have not been so pleasant, as they immediately retreated into Cave 1, and boarded the entrance with wooden planks out of fear of the creature's advance. This creature, of course, was an encounter with a Virginian, an encounter that resulted in the creation of a Latin paper, and from this Latin paper, we know that these missionaries were probably part of the Roman Catholic Church. However, it may have just been a Christian versed in the knowledge of the Latin language. The paper shows a sketch of a Virginian, and a roughly translated version of this reads, "Woman, 4 legs, you ought to be manifold. I want to see. Excellent moist skin, pale complexion, the deep depressed rim of connection. Some certain infants are dead. The uncle characteristics. Infants. The cross did not help. In shackles you will toil, and I will not ask. With his own way out of the mouth of the Olenificus. Do not worry." The text seemed to suggest that the missionaries attempted to use their crosses on the mutant, as well as an array of traps, which ultimately ended in failure. After this encounter, the missionaries decided to instead stick to the shadows and use the cave for most of their moving about the forest, scarred by their interactions on the surface. They used the cave systems for most of their moving about the forest, and they left many crucifixes scattered around the place. As they spent more and more time in the peninsula, they slowly became more and more paranoid. Out of fear, they began sketching crosses along the walls, leaving wooden and carved ones behind, and placing Bibles around the caves. They grew increasingly frightened by the movement they would sometimes hear through the cave system that they knew wasn't their own people. Always feeling watched, always afraid. Eventually, after much exploration and much damage done to the sanity of the missionaries and the crew alike, they finally did it. They discovered the artifacts deep within the border cave systems. Some took sketches of the obelisks, one being plastered on the wall of Cave 5. However, none could figure out how to operate these structures. The structure was far beyond their knowledge. They discovered a second artifact shortly after, which was the Resurrection Obelisk's opposite sister. One took death and gave it life, whilst the second took life and introduced it to death. After this is where events that occurred get very hard to determine. At some point, the missionaries had spread out in the cave systems, and for how long we are not sure. But I would have to guess for a substantial amount of time. This would seem to suggest that their time around the peninsula and possibly the artifacts was beginning to have some sort of psychological effect, as we begin to see a strange array of behaviours. Eventually, a group broke off from the missionaries to form the Christian cannibals that we see in the game in present day, wearing white paint with black crosses painted on them. And even more, to join with the regular cannibal clans that had been realised to be stalking them in previous days and nights. The ones that retained some humanity seemed to become infatuated by the ancient artifact devices, giving up on trying to activate them and instead worshipping them, and attempting to keep all others away from their places of worship by boarding up caves 1, 5, 3 and 9 in order to stop the outsiders from gaining entrance to their now private worshipping sites. How did we know that they were worshipping the obelisks? Well, we don't have definitive proof, but the next fact goes to seriously suggest that they were. So let me explain these two events as best I can. At some point after everything else I detailed, the second artifact, come to be known as the Death Artifact, was somehow mysteriously activated. The methods for how and why it activated is unknown, however we do know the horrific effects it had. At the time of its activation, there was a large gathering of the remnants of the mission worshipping directly at the cave, holding the artifact, and at Cave 5, where the picture of the artifact had been drawn onto the wall. All the missionaries we see are on their knees making gestures of worship to either the artifact or representations of them. And when the device is activated, it resulted in an instant flash death for all of the missionaries conducting worship. Now, I can't be certain, but the evidence seems to imply that at very least every human that was in the expensive cave systems at the time was instantly killed and appeared to be in a mummified-like state due to some sort of powerful, directable radiation. However, again, it's hard to say what exactly killed them, as we didn't see this flash death. The only evidence we have for this is the scattered remains of worshippers mummified looking at their deities of worship. From all the evidence we have in game, this is my best guess as to what eventually happened to these missionaries and the crew that brought them here. The rest of the surviving missionaries either being eaten by the cannibals or having to join their ranks. However, there is so much mystery surrounding these events and very sparse concrete evidence to what actually happened. So please, let's discuss what all of you think happened down in the comments and see if we can't get a better answer and get to the bottom of this. Well, what other videos would you guys like to see? If you have any ideas or have any questions you would like answered, please meet me down in the comments. If you did enjoy the video, please leave a like and go check out Law and Explained on Twitter and Discord. If you would like to support myself and the channel's content, as well as get access to behind the scenes and early content, as well as other rewards, you can become a channel member. I hope you guys did enjoy the video, and I'll talk to you guys in the next one.